How many people, I wonder? Might just be.
Good afternoon, and now we have speaker Dr. Kendi Guantai from EDI to Sense of Belonging, Bridging the Gap through Ubuntu. Taking a solution-focused approach, Kendi will share tips on how EDI and belonging initiatives can create greater value for organizations and deliver meaningful, sustainable change. The following session will be answering the questions of why belonging matters. How do we create more authentic enterprises? What does a sense of belonging look or feel like? And how about the protected characteristics? Kendi will draw from her research and experience to discuss why we should all be thinking about sense of belonging, as alongside equality, diversity, and inclusion. And what can we learn from the African spirit of Ubuntu? Dr. Kendi Guantai, welcome.
Thank you, Harry. Thank you very much. And lovely of you all to join us this Friday afternoon. I don't know whether you're joining us from the UK or from other parts of the world, in which case it may not be afternoon for you. I do not know what time it is, but thank you for joining us nonetheless. And thank you for inviting me as well to speak during this commsHERO week, which I hear has gone fantastically well. So I am very excited to be here. So without further ado, I'll get started by, I'll first, I can see lots of love hearts. This is cool. This is really good. Keep them coming, keep them coming. Yeah. So I don't have a presentation prepared in the sense that I don't have slides. So it's just me having a conversation with you, and I encourage interaction. Put stuff and comments in the chat. I'll keep looking at it. And I think Harry and the team will be keeping an eye on any questions that you might have. So feel free to keep them coming, right? So I'll start off by telling you a little bit about myself and my journey through EDI or DEI, depending on what, what you think is more important than what. So diversity, inclusion, and equity, right? So I will give you my journey through that, and then we will talk a little bit about diversity and why I have a problem with diversity. What is the issue I have there? Inclusion, what are the challenges with inclusion? And then why sense of belonging, and why do I think sense of belonging should be the next natural step coming in from diversity, equality, or equity and inclusion. Okay, so a little bit about myself. So I came to the United Kingdom in 2005. That tells you I was born elsewhere. I am not from the UK. I am from Kenya, Nairobi. I don't know if anybody here is from Nairobi, but if you are, so Nairobi is my home city. And I came in 2005, having worked in industry in communication and marketing for several years. So I was in the hospitality sector, I worked in the hotel industry, I worked in the third sector, and so on and so forth before I came here. So when I came here, I came to study at the University of Leeds, which is where I am currently. So I took a master's in advertising and marketing, and then I went on and studied, took my PhD, did my PhD, and then moved on now into academia. So I came from industry into academia. In many ways, I straddle both spaces quite well. So I lecture postgraduate students in the areas of corporate communication and reputation management, but I am also involved in industry. So I am currently the chair of the International Association for Business Communicators, covering Europe, Middle East, and North Africa. So there I get to mingle and meet with many people like yourselves who are in industry, who are still doing the work, and that keeps me informed and helps me to improve my own practice at work. So something else that I do that then brings me into this equality, diversity, and inclusion space is that I am the vice chair of the Chartered Association for Business Schools Race Equality Action Group. And we call ourselves an action group because we have gone beyond talking about things that need to be done to actually challenging business schools to start working on the things that need to happen. Change needs to happen. Talking about the change is no longer enough. We know what the problems are. We don't need to keep outlining them. Let's now start coming up with actually sustainable solutions. So those are some of the things that I do that maybe bring me to speak to you today. So when I came in 2005, something happened to me. It was the first time that I realized I was Black. I'll explain. So in Kenya, we referred to people based on ethnicity, right? So, for instance, we would say somebody, this is an Indian, a Chinese, a European person, or whatever, but not really. We didn't really use color to describe people. So I knew, of course, I was aware of it. I was aware of color. I was aware that people did use phrases like Black people and white people, but I've never really experienced what that meant till I came here. Then I was given the first form to fill, and I had to say whether I was Black or white, and which Black I was. Was I Black African, Black Caribbean, Black so and so? And so I went through this process of deconstructing and reconstructing my identity from a racial perspective. What I also found were what we call the protected characteristics. So we have the protected characteristics in the UK, which are in the Equalities Act. So things like age and sex and race and so on. So for me, the protected characteristic that stood out the most was obviously race, and then gender, needless to say it, so that cross-section or intersection. Now, the problem for me with choosing a protected characteristic to describe me was that this protected characteristic was not actually, I was limited in terms of my choice. It was ascribed to me whether I wanted it or not. So that started to color my experience. And it was the first time I came across what we call racialized experiences. I started to see how the world around me was constructed from this racialized perspective based on these protected characteristics, and therefore what permissions I had to operate in certain spaces where I was included and excluded from certain spaces, included in specific conversations and excluded in other conversations. I started to understand and to see how this colored the experiences of a people based on nothing else but how they looked. So this started to get me interested in protected characteristics beyond race. And I started to look intersectionally at how these interacted with each other and whether really by highlighting these protected characteristics, were we helping or were we creating a problem? So moving on then, what I found for me was that having been ascribed this protected characteristic and then trying to take ownership of it and give it meaning and positivity for myself, I entered a single story. So there's this overarching narrative about me based on people's perception of other people who they had interacted with who looked like me, or maybe they had seen them on TV, read of them in a book, or heard them on the radio, or maybe they live next door to them. Whatever it might be, that is what became the way I was described, and people interacted and related to me based on that. So that led to stereotyping. Now, I came across then a talk by a writer called Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. Chimamanda Adichie is a well-known Nigerian writer. And on TED, I love TED, and I'll be doing a bit of name dropping and TED talk in this talk. So Chimamanda gave a TED talk entitled "The Danger of a Single Story," and that helped me to start to unravel or unfold why it is that I was having a problem with taking ownership of this protected characteristic that had been ascribed to me in a very well-meaning way, perhaps, to try and help those who had been excluded to become much more included. So she says this: the single story creates stereotypes. Now, the problem with stereotypes is not that they are untrue, but that they are incomplete. They make one story become the only story. So you have people who will not interact with you beyond your protected characteristic. They don't see you as anything other than that protected characteristic. So you are gay, or you are Black, or you are white, or you are this, or you are that. That's not all that you are. You are many other things, and it denies you of your humanity. She goes on to say, the consequence of the single story is this: it robs people of dignity. It makes our recognition of our equal humanity difficult. So we may not all be equal, which is now when you realize that now we talk a lot more about equity than equality, but our humanity is definitely equal. But when we start othering people by highlighting characteristics that that we think define who they are, then we deny them of that equality in humanity. It emphasizes how we are different rather than how we are similar. And that becomes my story of Blackness, and the story that led me to start really trying to unpack diversity, equality or equity, and inclusion. So then let's go to diversity and why I think diversity really doesn't go far enough. So diversity for me is no more than counting beans. How many black beans, white beans, yellow beans, orange beans have I got? What really is that telling us? So people, organizations going to be in counting because they need to report stuff. Why? Because they are now suddenly being measured on this new diversity measure, and they don't know what it means or what they need to do. And half the time, even when they do know, the structures that they have created before, they do not support diversity in any real meaningful sense. And I'll give you an example of that. Yet another lady who's got a TED Talk is called Arwa. She's called Arwa Madawi. Arwa is ARWA. So Arwa describes herself on LinkedIn as the founder, president, chief hopes and dreams officer, and chief minority officer of, wait for it, rentaminority.com. Rent a minority. What is Rent a Minority? She describes it as a revolutionary new service bringing diversity on demand. Now, this is tongue in cheek, of course. And when Arwa put this together, it was a social experiment. So if you go now on your web browser, don't do it this minute, but after this stop, and search rentaminority.com, it actually exists. There is a website which Ara has put together. On this website, her idea was, so if you're a company and you need to demonstrate diversity somehow, you can come in and hire or rent a minority, take them to your organization for 2 hours a day, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, however long you need them, and then bring them back. So it's like borrowing a book from a library, right? So on this page, she's got rentees, the people you can rent, right? And I will tell you about two of these people. So one is a smiling Muslim woman. So there is a picture of this Muslim woman, hijab and all, looking lovely. And the caption is certified not to support ISIS or your money back. True story. Second one is an intellectual black guy. So there's this black guy, glasses, looking very clever. And the caption says, good for tech conferences. Also available to stand next to you while you say racist things at parties, because you can't be racist if your best friend is black. Okay? So these are real. Now I'll tell you what is sad about this story. Two things. One, people started to apply to her, to Arwa, to say, I would like to be a rentee. Can I apply for a job so that then I can be borrowed like a book to be taken to organization X and Y? The next thing that is sad is that organizations, including large corporations, started to email Arwa to say, I'm interested in your services. Can we have a conversation? What does that tell you about diversity? It is performative. For many organizations, it's performative. I want to be seen to be diverse, but I don't intend to make any changes that actually are meaningful. And I'm not questioning myself enough in terms of how is it that I am in this place now, that my organization does not reflect the environment in which it operates in terms of the people who work within this organization, because that is where the problem is. So then you find also when it comes to reporting, we started to see people's diversity reporting, people trying to hide a lot of figures or to give a story that creates an impression that is not really true. And when you interrogate the numbers, sometimes they don't make sense. An example is this acronym BAME, Black, Asian, and Minority Ethnic. So I was working at another organization quite recently, and I was looking at their diversity reporting. Now, the top level, the very top grade in their organization, top management, they have a report that says 5% of the top management are BAME male. 5%. Okay. Now that can give you the impression, or the narrative that they're trying to push, is that you have Black and Asian people, 5% of them being in this top tier. But when you interrogate the numbers, you realize that in that 5%, 54% of them identify as white, because in that acronym BAME, there is the minority ethnic, okay, which is neither Asian nor Black. So actually, how many Asian people and how many Black people have you got in that stock level in this organization? Do you see what I mean? So it becomes very easy to hide behind the numbers. So let's move on to inclusion then. So seeing that challenge with diversity, inclusion also comes along with its own challenges. The problem with inclusion is power dynamics. That in inclusion, when someone is asking you to include them, they're asking you to do them a favor, right? They're asking you to do something for them, which then means that the person, the includer, is a person who is in power because they excluded in the first place, and now they're letting you in. Now, when they let you in, how are they letting you in? You know, that whole story of being asked to the dance and being asked to dance and all of that stuff. The problem is when the includer is including you, they determine for you what space you're going to take, how much space you will take, and how you will take that space. So really, have they had to change much? They don't need to. And you can see the data in terms of progression. I mean, that's where you hear about gender pay gap. You hear about ethnicity pay gap, for instance. Or in this same organization that I was talking to you about, I was looking at the data in terms of promotions. And people who identify as Black and Asian actually have reportedly lower rates of succeeding when they apply for promotion compared to those who identify as white. So what is the problem here? They have been invited into the organization, space has been created for them, but then they are siloed, and they are not allowed to take up space in a meaningful way, in a way that makes sense for them. I'll give you another example here. So in my previous life, when I was working in industry, I worked for this large organization, and the executive board was made up of all men. So we hired our first female board member. So the first meeting, so picture this, board table, all male but this lady. And when the meeting was about to start, the chair of the board looks at her and says, Mrs. So-and-so, could you please pour us tea? Serve us the tea. Serve the men with the tea. She was there in her capacity as a board member, just as they were. So she was sat at the table, but what role was she playing at that table? She was still seen as subservient. She is there to serve the men. Nothing really had changed. And I'm sure people have lots and lots of examples of things like that. So Rebecca Bastian, the Vice President for Communication and Culture for the Zillow Group, says the following: it is not enough to simply include people at the table, but to amplify everyone's voices, to clear barriers and appreciate each other for our unique backgrounds. And that is where then a sense of belonging comes in. Why sense of belonging? Because it goes beyond the protected characteristics. The problem with focusing too much on the protected characteristic is that it can potentially create yet another problem of othering. Because then, so we have a community of practice actually that we call an Ubuntu sense of belonging community of practice. And one of our most active members is a white, middle class male. And I remember him coming in and he said, I'm really sorry, I don't have any protected characteristics. Can I be here anyway? You know, and it was interesting to me that he felt the need to apologize for not having protected characteristics. And it was an act of bravery for him to step into that space where virtually everybody else had some form of protected characteristic. So I thought to myself, what about the other people who are not as brave as him to step into this space? What are they thinking? What are they feeling? By trying to create special inclusion mechanisms, what other exclusion is happening that we are unaware of? Now, don't get me wrong. I do think there is need for us to work on those who are excluded to try and make the playing fields much more equitable for them. I do not deny that. But what I am saying is that once we start to focus on our humanity, we understand that by uplifting one group, we need to uplift everybody with it. That privilege can be shared. It doesn't have to be taken from somebody to be given to somebody else in that crude form of doing it. There are different ways that we can approach it. So sense of belonging then, there is, when we talk about sense of belonging, what actually does it mean? So sense of belonging talks about our awareness of self-awareness, and who we are in relation to other people. You will hear people talking about using words such as connectedness or mattering or cared about or accepted or respected or valued. So I'm pretty sure if I ask in this group, is there a time when you have felt you don't belong? Be it from primary school or nursery school to where you are. I'm pretty sure each one of you will have a few stories to tell, right? And that doesn't matter what protected characteristics you have or you do not have. You share one thing, and that is your humanity. And sometimes people behave in ways that they exclude you, so you know what that feels like. And you know what it feels like to be included and to feel that you belong. There is no difference between how I feel when I don't belong to how somebody who may not have the same protected characteristics that I have. There's no difference between how I feel and how they feel. We feel the same thing. We desire the same thing. Now, what sense of belonging does is that it gives us a purpose. Okay, it gives us a purpose. It makes us feel like our life matters. We count for something. And when, in fact, there is a recent paper, a Sage paper, by Nathaniel Lambert and other colleagues, and they argue that to belong is to matter. Sense of belonging enhances meaning in life, and they found evidence that shows that idea of my life has meaning and I belong are correlated. Okay. Now, when I feel that my life has meaning, what does that make me want to do? It gives me a purpose. If I have a purpose, what do I want to do? I want to make a contribution. I start to think beyond myself. I start to think about what contribution and what legacy I am going to leave when I am no longer here. I become aware of my actions, my thoughts, my words, and how they color that which surrounds me and how they affect the people around me. So that sense of belonging can be incredibly powerful. When people feel they belong, they make a much greater effort to to do more for an organization, for instance. So in a recent Forbes article, there is a sociologist, Tracy Bauer, and she argues that belonging is more than being part of a group. So when you're part of a group doesn't mean you belong. It just means you're part of a group, right? It is a sense of connectedness that makes you feel part of something, an attachment and closeness to a group of people among whom you feel thoroughly accepted. So closely related to belonging is authenticity. Because for you to truly belong, you must show up as who you are. A question that I ask a lot of people is, who do you feel you need to become in order to be successful in this space? I ask that of my students as well. Who do you think you need to become in order to be successful in this space? Now, if that is anything other than who you truly are, if there are bits of you that you need to leave out and leave at the door so that you can be successful, how is this enhancing your sense of self? And how is it allowing you to be able to be as productive as you can and make a reasonable contribution? Because I'm having to leave bits of me out the door, aren't I? Right? So imagine what that calls for. So when it comes to authenticity, the work of Brené Brown, the good old Brené Brown, I'm sure a lot of you have heard of Brené Brown. If you've done any work on courage, vulnerability, and so on, Brené Brown is your girl. So she says that authenticity is the daily practice of letting go of who we think we are, and or rather, I'll say that again. It is the daily practice of letting go of who we think we are supposed to be and embracing who we truly are. Letting go of who we think we are supposed to be and who is putting those thoughts in our heads. The person I think I need to be in order to be successful here. So there's also yet another TED talk. This one is by a lady called Caroline McHugh, and her TED talk is entitled The Art of Being Yourself. Now, in this Art of Being Yourself, she talks a lot about mirrors. But one of the things that she said that really stuck with me, she says, when you look at a mirror, you're not looking at yourself, you're looking for yourself. When you look at a mirror, you're not looking at yourself, you're looking for yourself. So when we talk about relationship growth, personal growth always happens in relationship. And I'm not just talking about romantic relationship, I'm talking about relationships with other human beings. Why? Because we see ourselves in other people. We see ourselves reflected back at us through interaction. And that is where sense of belonging now starts to become powerful. I imagine what that means for our leadership. Because in a recent study, actually, people were asked, what do you think is the number one attribute of a good leader? And the number one attribute of a good leader, many people voted, was self-awareness. When you have self-aware leaders, what are they? They are compassionate, right? They are compassionate and they are able to also relate to the experiences of their employees and their organizations. So what we need to be asking ourselves in organizations is how do we undermine authenticity and sense of belonging? What are those structures? So there's a colleague of mine who did a study the other day about students, and she was trying to see the barriers of entry, when it comes to getting placements and work placements and so on. And what she found was, for instance, for Black ladies, Black students who are being told that you cannot, to increase your chances of getting hired or getting the placement, you need to change your hair. So wear a wig, straighten your hair, wear a weave, just don't show up as you naturally are, because that is not helpful. So this person has got to go and physically change what they look like so that they can get a job. People have to change their names so that they can get a job. And that's really sad when people have to go through that. You've had like, for instance, men being forced to be much more masculine, or you're too effeminate, that is not good for you, or you're a woman, you want to be a leader, lower your voice. Remember Margaret Thatcher? Lower your voice, because it gives you much more credibility, a feeling of power and being in control. You go into organizations where same-sex couples, for instance, don't enjoy the same benefits that heterosexual couples do. And there are many things structurally that we do in our organizations that we don't really think about. The consequences of some of that is thinking about how sometimes people cannot be, it lowers productivity amongst your staff members. Accountability can be diminished because people don't really care. The job is a means to an end. I'm not making any, I don't have any purpose. I'm not making a contribution. It slows down growth. You can get high employee turnover and so on and so forth. Remember, people don't leave jobs or organizations. People leave bad managers. So if our managers are not leading from that courageous, authentic, compassionate place, what is going to happen to the organizations that they lead? Of authenticity, Arthur W. Page wrote the following: in a word, authenticity will be the coin of the realm for successful corporations and for those who lead them. So it is really important that we start to embrace that authenticity and build it within organizations. And we've seen what happens when organizations are inauthentic. Remember Volkswagen? Yeah? Did I say more? So then this brings us to Ubuntu, and I can see I probably have 2 or 3 more minutes to go. So this brings us to Ubuntu. And why is Ubuntu then, which is an African philosophy, how can it help us? And why is it at the University of Leeds you've got this Ubuntu sense of belonging group? Ubuntu is a philosophy that a lot of the Bantu-speaking people of sub-Saharan Africa use, but it is not a philosophy that is just there. I think a lot of people around the world have a Ubuntu, but they use different words to describe it. And what it is just that recognition that I am because of who we are, my relationship to everybody around me. So it brings us back to that first point that we made about humanity. In Ubuntu, I am not just aware of how I am in relation to those I am in this time space reality with, on this journey with at this moment, but I am aware also of my connection to those who are coming behind me. So that's where sustainability comes in. I know that I have a responsibility to those who are coming and behind me, and I also have a responsibility to honor those who have gone before me. So Ubuntu then brings everything together in this philosophy of shared humanity. It asks you to be compassionate. It asks you to empathize, because you can see yourself in others, and therefore when people say treat others as you would like to be treated, it doesn't become that difficult because you can see yourself in them. So in terms of the change that we can make, so I'll not talk too much about Ubuntu, but if you want to learn more about Ubuntu, you can look at the work of Archbishop Desmond Tutu. Archbishop Desmond Tutu obviously was pivotal when it came to fighting apartheid in South Africa. And he writes a lot about the Ubuntu philosophy. And what it is actually is what I have described in terms of sense of belonging. So for us as communicators, what difference can we make? When I ask people this, they say to me, I'm not senior enough, my organization is too big, it's been here for many years, they'll never change. And I say there is nobody who's too small to bring about change. There is an African saying that says, if you think you are too small to make a difference, then you haven't spent a night with a mosquito. Those of you who have know exactly what I'm talking about, right? So what can we do as communicators? Some things that we can do is, for instance, simply creating psychological safe spaces where our colleagues can get together, protected characteristics or not, and have powerful conversations about lived experience. How I came to start to understand my own racialized lived experiences in the UK is because I met other people in safe spaces where we were able to talk and share what our experiences were, and then to start coming up with the language that described what we were going through. Story sharing and meaning making. Then once you have made meaning and you know what this means, you can relate with it and you know what to do about it. So that is one way that you can do that. How do you create psychological safe spaces? There are different tools you can use. One of them is Cancel. So Cancel is used in many, many organizations around the world. And there is a little book called Way of Cancel that you can read that can guide you in terms of how to set up Cancel and run Cancel in your organization. It can be done virtually, it can be done physically. You can have story circles, listening circles, and other forms of sharing that you can encourage. The second thing you can do is to try and really encourage listening. Now, we have organizations that are talking organizations, but not very good at listening, especially internally. So there are times when the managers need to just zip it and allow people to talk, and talk in a way that is not punitive, that they will not be punished for speaking up, and really listen. They're the ones with the lived experiences. They're the ones who can voice what it feels like to be in this organization. And lastly, remember, as communicators, we are the storytellers of the organization. We sculpt these stories, we frame these stories, we give meaning internally and externally. We need to take ourselves to task as well. What phrases are we using? What words are we using? Can we challenge? BAME, what does that mean? When I say someone is white, what does that mean? It doesn't really mean anything. And so we can challenge some of these things and start to come up with more useful and usable and meaningful phrases to describe our human experiences. Remember as well, when you're within the organization as well, what did I want to say? Think about attribution of success, reward, and recognition. Which voices do we exclude in the stories we tell? Which voices do we include? Which voices do we privilege? Which voices do we deny of privilege? Which experiences do we other? Who do we consider to be important? A quick example here is the other day, this young scientist discovered something amazing in some whatever laboratory, and whatever it was, they were going to get an award for it. Now, when it came to the reward and recognition, guess who got it? The manager of the laboratory, who did absolutely nothing, really. Okay, you can say they facilitated and created a space, but the person who actually created whatever this was that they were being recognized for did not receive any recognition. So, what is happening then? Why is their story not being told? Right? So we start to attribute this success to the people who actually didn't create the success. So finally, in telling that story, I'll take you back to what Chimamanda said. As a communicator, remember the danger of a single story. Our story of belonging and our helping our organizations to create that belonging will come from how we tell those stories. And I leave you with this, another African saying that says, until the story of the hand is told by the lion, the tail of the hand will always glorify the hunter. Thank you.
Beautiful. What a quote. I didn't have time to write it down, so I'm going to have to do that. Fantastic. Thank you, Dr. Kendi Guantai. Very, very much appreciated. There's a few questions there. First of all, there's a few parallels I see, because I've just listened to a talk by Chaya Mistry, who was very much and it was all about human up, the call of human leadership and communication. And you were talking about those companies that are just sort of pressing the button to say we need to look good in front of people, but we don't really know what we're talking about. And even to the extent of contacting renterminority.com. I mean, for goodness sake, it does show how tunnel vision they actually are. So do you think that's really, from what you're saying, is I think it's that human upside of things, and to appreciate each other's backgrounds and not say we're all the same. We do have different cultures, and to appreciate that and to celebrate that, perhaps, you know. But I still think we're a long way away from that at the moment. My question is, with your students then, in a time when we are so sort of you're either on the Brexit side or the non-Brexit side. You're either on the Conservative or you're on nobody's side. Mm-hmm. Instead of attacking each other, do you find that the next generation will start to try to educate those that don't quite understand it, or are clumsy, really clumsy and quite reckless and quite downright offensive, but perhaps don't even know it?
Yes, absolutely. There's a lot of hope in this new generation. It's no longer fashionable to be bigoted or whatever, you know. Think about what happened when we had the very sad killing of George Floyd, and we had the Black Lives Matter movement, and we had people taken to the street. The thing that really touched my heart is that for the first time, it was not just Black people protesting about Black issues. There were people from every race, every creed, every whatever, people joining together to say, in the what now has become the anti-racist movement, because they are saying this is an ism that is not good for us. It's an injustice. We are going to fight for social justice of all humanity, and I love that. And I feel that this new generation is very, very much at the forefront of that. And they are educating themselves, and they are story sharing in very meaningful ways. If you think about what happens now with COVID and the inequalities that were laid bare because of that, and these kids are having to live through that in a way, experience it in a way that perhaps even we are not. And I think that is going to make them far more resilient. And finally, in terms of our differences, when I introduce comms to them and I say to them, I'm going to try and define corporate communication. And I say, we need to be to cohere and to speak in one voice. I said, well, don't think that that means we are all the same thing. We are not little minions. So I think about it like jazz, So think about improvisation in jazz. And people come in and there is a pianist and there's a flute and there is the drums and there is this thing. Everything is doing its own unique, authentic thing, making it sound, but together, then they have that unified piece of music that we enjoy. That's what we should be aiming at, I think, even in terms of our society. Difference is not a bad thing.
Okay, so this is, and that's great. It's a message that you need to get across. Has your degree in advertising and marketing helped at all? Do you know? Is that any? Yeah, I mean, in this modern world, do you think you've used skills from that, on that background? You are where you are.
Yes. So are you asking whether my background is helping in the diversity inclusion space?
Yes, yes. And the way, I mean, you're talking to us now, and you are extremely, I mean, the comments here, including my own, is that I could listen to you all day. You make it very easy to listen to, and you make a lot of sense. And I'll just say one more thing is in the police. I remember training college 30 years ago. It'd be like, there's no stereotyping. You're not allowed to do it. It shouldn't happen. And we're all thinking about, okay, so should I go around to my mother's church and wait for all the blue rinse ladies and men coming out of the church and then search their boots for drugs? But your message is very clear. It's the single story. So what you're saying, the single story is, okay, you've got the young lad with the cap that's facing backwards, but then my son is that as well. So, and I know he's not involved in drugs. So you do stereotype, because I think it's a human phenomenon. I mean, it's a human, but it's very important to realize that you don't just have the single story, that you have to be aware of it and deal with the other aspects of it.
Absolutely. So the thing is, we all, I mean, we have stereotypes back home as well. And, even here, you hear people saying about the Irish and the British and the English and the who and the what. The problem is when those stories are used to disempower, to dehumanize, to other, to create structures that mean certain people are excluded simply because of that stereotype. That is where the problem is. Yes, being aware of difference is great. Celebrate those differences. But then don't let those differences be the only thing that you know about a person, about a place, or about a thing. So this is where we are being challenged to take the time to educate ourselves and learn more. And the more we learn, the more we realize, the more similar we are. So my journey in diversity and inclusion and equity, and now to sense of belonging, was quite a painful one, because some of those racialized experiences were not pleasant at all. And at one point I had a victim mentality. I was like, why me? Why me? What's wrong with me? I mean, this one thing I can't change about myself. Why are you punishing me, attacking me, othering me over something I can do nothing about? That was an incredibly painful place to be, and quite traumatic. But then over time, I've had to get, coaching, mentoring, and help to a point where I can have those very difficult conversations without going into victimhood. That allows me to be part of the solution. Now, what I recognize is that not everybody is there. Some people are further, behind, and they're going through that trauma, and they will need different supports, but it's being aware of all of us and understanding that we count. This journey is a continuum. And we are never going to all be at the same place, but we can help others along as we understand that shared humanity.
And that different support is very much, I think you quoted earlier, who we think we should be and embracing who we are. It's not who we think we should be, it's embracing who we are. But that needs confidence, doesn't it? That needs confidence to buck the trend, hold your head up high, and obviously feel like you've got the support of your workplaces, humanizing the workplace again and that side of things. I mean, are we a long way from that yet? Do you think we're anywhere? Because sometimes I look on social media and I think, oh my God, we need to just start again. This is horrendous. People are fighting each other and you're this, you're that. And it's extremes on both sides. And tell me it's better than that.
It is definitely better. And I'll give you a very simple example. When I came to Leeds, and I used to use public transport, and I was on the bus, and I would sit. I had many a time. If I sat on a window seat and there was an empty seat next to me, people would stand up. They would not sit next to me. Okay. Now I go to the gym yesterday, and we are just about to start the class, and this beautiful blonde British girl comes up to me and she says, "I can see you have an extra hairband. Can I borrow that, please?" She doesn't know me. We've never spoken before, but there was no barrier. And I can get a hairband from you, without anything. And to me, it's a very small thing, but it communicated something to me. And that's the change that I am seeing and I am observing. So I think we are getting somewhere. But remember also, as we start to ask ourselves, why be authentic? Brené Brown talks about authenticity in relation to vulnerability, that stepping outside of this persona we have created. And some of us are attached to it, to our ego. We are really attached to it because it protects us. The minute you step out as yourself, then you're really, really exposed. Harry, you and I had this conversation earlier where I was saying to you, I feel nervous about this presentation because I'm exposed. I don't have slides to hide behind. And for a lot of us, that is what we feel like. But maybe for us to be able to articulate the importance of authenticity and sense of belonging, what I'd invite you all to do is to think about this. When do I feel authentic? Okay. When I feel authentic, or I know I'm being authentic, what does that feel like? Does that look like? And what do I notice? What do I notice? What do I do? So do, think, feel. Okay. What do I do? What do I think? What do I feel like? And what do I notice? When I am being inauthentic, what does that feel like? What does that look like? What does it force me to do? If you come up with a list of authentic self and inauthentic self, I don't think anybody will need to convince you which one you'd rather be, and which one gives you greater sense of joy, sense of belonging, and greater purpose, and allows you to peak perform.
Kendi, you're an absolute star. Thank you. I'm just going to point out Chaya Mysteries. There's a link on the chats with regard to she's hosting an event on Ubuntu with a master coach for anyone who wants to learn. And I've got to say, so next up, we have the commsHERO. We're out of time, you see, Kendi. That went like in a flash, didn't it? So yeah, we have the commsHERO week wrap up and close with Anik Simpson and Asif Chowdhury. But before I pass it over, I just want to mention a couple of things. Competitions, use the hashtag commsHERO and tweet us to win Sharpies, vouchers and more. And second thing is jump on the social lounge and keep talking to one another. See you there. Thank you, Kendi.
Thank you.